The House will be in order. The chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., October 2nd, 2023. I hereby appoint the Honorable Mike Bost to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, Kevin McCarthy, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of House of January 9, 2023, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with the time equally allotted between the parties, and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip will be limited to 5 minutes, but in no event shall the debate continue beyond 1:50 p.m. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Nickel, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's Monday morning and the federal government is open for business. We came just hours away from a shutdown this weekend with 209 House Democrats and 125 House Republicans voting to put people over politics. A government shutdown would have been a disaster for the American people. And I'm glad Democrats and reasonable Republicans were able to come together to get a short-term funding package through the House, through the Senate, and onto the President's desk with just hours to spare. This short-term funding package includes an extension of the FAA authorization, funding for flood insurance programs, $16 billion for disaster relief, and most importantly, it'll keep the lights on for the over 6,500 federal employees in North Carolina's 13th district. Looking ahead, this short-term funding package gives us more time to come together, find common ground, and pass bipartisan spending bills for the full year. For Democrats, that means funding for Ukraine. Our support for Ukraine cannot waver. I wish we didn't have to spend any money in Ukraine, but if Vladimir Putin wins, we'll have to spend 1,000 times more trying to contain an aggressive and emboldened Russia around the globe. If we abandon Ukraine, Russia will win. Putin will win. Support for Ukraine is in our national interest, Mr. President. Mr. Speaker, for Republicans, that means securing the border and taking up immigration reform. As a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus and a member of the New Democrat Coalition's Immigration and Border Security Task Force, I remain focused and committed to working across the aisle to secure our border and advance comprehensive immigration reform. I believe that the best path forward is through the bipartisan Keep America Open Act that I've co-sponsored and is being led by the Problem Solvers Caucus. This legislation upholds the top-line numbers agreed to in the bipartisan budget agreement. It includes funding for Ukraine, which is desperately needed. It includes Title 42 reform legislation that I helped introduce with a bipartisan group of members earlier this year that will help secure the southern border while giving us more time to enact meaningful, long-term reforms to our overburdened immigration system. And it includes bipartisan reforms to increase transparency and address long-term spending, an area where I agree with my Republican colleagues. The path to 218 votes on the budget won't come from the far left or the far right. It comes from the center with proposals just like this one. The reality is that we've only got 44 days to get this done, and we're right back where we started over the weekend. We never should have been in this situation in the first place. A short-term CR is a Band-Aid on a long-term problem. That's why I've introduced the bipartisan No Budget, No Pay Act. My bill would withhold members' pay if both houses don't agree to a concurrent budget resolution by April 15th for the fiscal year starting October 1st, or if both houses haven't passed all the regular appropriations bills by September 30th for the fiscal year starting October 1st. Folks, we could have been in a situation right this morning where our entire federal government workforce was getting no pay, but members of Congress still would have been getting their paycheck, and that's wrong. This bill will incentivize Congress to get it done and prevent future government shutdowns. This brinksmanship is no good for our economy. Listen, folks, I came to Congress to get things done, And I'll continue to set aside the noise, find common ground wherever it exists, and deliver for the people of North Carolina's 13th District. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Joyce, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to address the House and ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, last month, more than 400,000 illegal immigrants crossed the Darien Gap into Central America on their way to our southern border, nearly double the number that had arrived in all of 2022. Let's put that number in perspective. 400,000 is more than double the populations of Altoona, Johnstown, Chambersburg, Lewistown, Breezewood, Gettysburg, Waynesboro, Mifflintown, Newport, McConnellsburg, Greencastle, Huntington, Shippensburg, and Bedford, all of those combined. It is clear that President Biden's border policies, which welcome illegal immigration, have created a national security crisis, a public health crisis, a humanitarian crisis, all due to the porous southern border. Since Joe Biden took office, there have been a total of 7.6 million encounters at our southern border. And for the third year in a row, Americans now are on track to see the worst border crisis in our nation's history. This year, we've seen public schools used as holding facilities for illegal immigrants, instead of being used for American students who are already suffering from historic learning losses following Biden's prolonged school shutdowns. While an influx of illegal immigrants has strained the food banks, the shelters, and the hospitals along our southern border, this administration continues to turn a blind eye and refuses to assist the communities that are threatened and the communities that are in need. It is time for the Senate to pass the Secure the Border Act, which would, first, force the Biden administration to restart construction of the border wall, second, increase the number of Border Patrol agents, third, end catch and release, and finally, deploy the new technologies that our Border Patrol agents have requested in order to help secure our southern border. President Biden's failure to address this crisis is simply unacceptable. And report after report from Eagle Pass, San Diego, and McAllen show that this crisis will only continue to worsen each and every day. We can't afford business as usual from Washington, and we cannot abandon our Border Patrol agents who deal with this problem. It is time for Democrats in Congress to join us and deliver real solutions and not more empty promises to the American people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, we're going to pick up where we left off over the weekend, sort of the high school drama about governing the House of Representatives. We have some people who are playing with fire. We've watched them work to the brink. It happened earlier in the spring where we're dealing with the debt ceiling, and we're back at it now dealing with what we're going to do in terms of funding the government going forward. We know where this ends. There will be an agreement in November or December or January that largely follows the outline of what we all agreed to do in the spring. Democrats and Republicans, President Biden, had an agreement that set the top-line numbers to be able to move forward with the budget. Ultimately, I think the governing wing of the Republican Party will come around and work with a unified Democratic caucus to be able to fulfill the commitment that we made in the spring. Whether or not Kevin McCarthy is Speaker or not is largely irrelevant in terms of this larger issue. the governing wing of both parties will come together, and I think will do what is right for the American people based on what we agreed to do months ago. In the meantime, we actually have work to do. There are issues that need our attention. In the New York Times 2 days ago, it's only a matter of time before more dams fail. We watched 2 dams in Libya collapse, killing more than 11,000 people. This should be a wake-up call for those of us in the United States. There are more than 91,000 dams in the United States. The average age is 61 years. About a third of those, the failure would result in loss of life and significant economic and environmental damage. The Infrastructure and Jobs Act included hundreds of millions of dollars for dam safety. Welcome, but a minuscule amount of what we need to do when there are about $76 billion of immediate need dealing with dam safety. There are some very cost-effective solutions. One of them we've pioneered in the Pacific Northwest, which is just removing the dam. In 2012 and 2014, we transformed the ecosystem of the Elwha River in Washington, the largest dam removal in American history. And we are currently working on an even larger project with 4 dams being removed on the Klamath River in southern Oregon and northwest and northern California. Dam removal is much more cost-effective. I've worked on the Infrastructure and Transportation Infrastructure Committee to try and have a system where any time a dam removal was more cost-effective than trying to renovate it, that it would be authorized. We're looking at the changing landscape, the problems with the Colorado River, where the dams no longer have intakes where they'll be able to get the water out. We're looking at dead pools being formed in along the Colorado River. We have to rethink the way that the hydrology works, the dam works. The climate change has radically adjusted our notion of what we can and should do with them for the future. This is but one example of a simple, common sense, direct effort that we should take that will save lives, save money, and regenerate the environment, as we're going to see in the Klamath River Basin. Working with Native Americans, working with nature-based solutions for climate challenges, we're all going to be better off. And then we can perhaps stay away from the sideshows here that are entertaining but don't get us anywhere. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, Benjamin Franklin described the limitations of any deliberative body in his closing speech to the Constitutional Convention. He said, "When you assemble a number of men to have the advantage of their joint wisdom, you inevitably assemble with those men all their prejudices, their passions, their errors of opinion, their local interests, and their selfish views. From such an assembly can a perfect production be expected." Well, we have certainly approached these limits in our deliberations in recent days. And I want to pause for a moment and assess where we are and where we're going. The Roman Empire fell for many reasons, but the 2 most prominent were that it destroyed its economy by overspending and it failed to secure its borders. Clearly, these 2 self-inflicted calamities are converging right now upon our country, and we're fast running out of time to avert them. For this reason, House Republicans have sought, with the most slender of majorities, to reverse these policies, albeit imperfectly. A few weeks ago, we passed H.R. 2, the strongest border security bill in a century. Over the past months, our majority on the Appropriations Committee has drafted the 12 appropriations bills which bend discretionary spending down and enact important reforms. Now, I admit that we are inexcusably late in that process. The approach of the fiscal year, though, provided us impetus to complete this work. Last week, we began taking up and adopting appropriation bills that now comprise 70% of federal discretionary spending on the eve of an impending shutdown. We've learned from experience that a government shutdown can be administered in a manner that does enormous damage to the economy and to the lives of millions of Americans. The president, if he wishes, can destroy every small business on federal land and those adjacent to federal land. Obama went so far as to barricade every monument and memorial, chain the gates of every acre of federal land, and even barricade the turnouts overlooking Yosemite Valley so that people couldn't even pull over to catch a glimpse of it. Mr. Biden had made it very clear that he intended to follow that strategy, specifically designed to create a panic and to force an immediate resolution in favor of the status quo. Accordingly, our conference put forward a 30-day continuing resolution to avert a shutdown while reducing non-defense discretionary spending by 8% and enacting the border security bill that we had previously passed. Unfortunately, 21 Republicans joined House Democrats to defeat this resolution. Now out of time and faced with an imminent shutdown, our conference directed the Speaker to put a 45-day continuing resolution on the floor without the previous reforms as the only way to avert a shutdown and to continue our work to complete the appropriations process. We canceled the October recess to complete this work. Yet now, we are faced with the threat that a Republican will move to vacate the Republican Speaker of the House. It will only require 4 other Republican members to join the Democrats to achieve this result. The immediate effect will be to paralyze the House indefinitely because no other business can be taken up until a replacement is elected. Just when we are on the verge of completing the appropriations process that in turn will finally initiate discussions with the Senate that are vital to change the dangerous path that our country is on. I cannot conceive of a more counterproductive and self-destructive course than that. The supreme irony is that this is being initiated by self-described conservatives. Do they honestly believe that when the Democrats side with them to remove a Republican speaker, that they will then side with them to name a more conservative replacement? Of course not. The Democrats will certainly recruit the most liberal Republicans to establish a left-of-center coalition to run the House. This is exactly what happened in California in 1994. A coalition speaker will move the administration of the House sharply to the left and effectively end the Republican House majority that the people elected in 2022. I implore my Republican colleagues to look past their prejudices, their passions, their errors of opinion, their local interests, and their selfish views, and to make a wise decision when it's needed most at this critical moment in the life of our country. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to raise a question. What was the secret side deal on Ukraine? House Democrats and President Biden have said that as Speaker McCarthy was asking Republicans to vote for a continuing resolution so as to avoid having to take the Senate's plus up in Ukraine money, that the Speaker of the House was actually cutting a side deal to bring Ukraine legislation to this floor with President Biden and House Democrats. So let me get this straight. To extend Joe Biden's spending and Joe Biden's policy priorities, the Speaker of the House gave away to Joe Biden the money for Ukraine that Joe Biden wanted. It is going to be difficult for my Republican friends to keep calling President Biden feeble while he continues to take Speaker McCarthy's lunch money in every negotiation. The Speaker of the House has responded to these reports of a secret side deal on money for Ukraine, opaquely stating that he still wants to fund Ukraine and our border. I have a few replies to this statement. First, the Speaker's statement confirms the existence of a secret deal. And I have talked to members of our own leadership who have said they didn't even know that Speaker McCarthy was negotiating a secret side deal outside of our conference, outside of his own leadership team, for the sake of Ukraine. Second, Ukraine has lost the support of a majority of the majority. The last time there was a freestanding Ukraine vote on this floor, it was last week. 101 Republicans voted for it, 117 Republicans voted against it. According to the Hastert rule, which Speaker McCarthy agreed to in January, you cannot use Democrats to roll a majority of the majority, certainly on something as consequential as Ukraine. So for all the crocodile tears about what may happen later this week about a motion to vacate, working with the Democrats is a yellow brick road that has been paved by Speaker McCarthy, whether it was the debt limit deal, the CR, or now the secret deal on Ukraine. Third, this is swampy log rolling. The American people deserve single subject bills. I get that a lot of folks might disagree with my perspectives on the border or on Ukraine, but can we at least agree that no matter how you feel about Ukraine or the southern border, they each deserve the dignity of their own consideration and should not be rolled together where they might pass where each individually wouldn't? This is what we're trying to get away from. This is the spirit of the January agreement we made with the Speaker. No more lashing these disparate issues together so that the American people's interests are subjugated here on the floor of the House. You know how we should stand up for our border? Demand that the United States Senate take up our single subject appropriation bill that funded the border. It created Republican unity. We voted for it. It has the policy demands that the continuing resolution that Speaker McCarthy advocated for on this floor did not. Our DHS funding bill requires E-Verify. And then hours later, after we passed that, the Speaker wanted us to vote for a continuing resolution that didn't include E-Verify. Retreat is never a strategy to win anything. So, Mr. Speaker, just tell us, what was in the secret Ukraine side deal? What commitments were made to President Biden to continue the spending of President Biden in exchange for doing things for President Biden? It is becoming increasingly clear who the Speaker of the House already works for, and it's not the Republican conference. Mr. Speaker, I would ask that these questions be answered soon, because there may be other votes coming today or later this week that could be implicated by the answers to these questions. Members of the Republican Party might vote differently on a motion to vacate if they heard what the Speaker had to share with us about his secret side deal with Joe Biden on Ukraine. I'll be listening. Stay tuned. And I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Now, members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities towards the President and to direct their remarks to the Chair. The Chair now recognizes a gentlewoman from Iowa, Ms. Miller Meeks, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise today to congratulate Fire Chief Steve Korek on his retirement. His 4-decade-long career of extraordinary dedication, commitment, and service to the Bettendorf Fire Department began on September 6, 1983. In less than a decade, he rose through the ranks, becoming a captain and a fire marshal. His commitment didn't go unnoticed, as he was named the Bettendorf Fire Department Officer of the Year in 1991. He received accolades such as the 2015 Governor's Fire Prevention Officer of the Year Award and actively contributed to organizations like the American Burn Association, International Outreach Committee, and the St. Florian Burn Board of Directors. Chief Korek's service extended beyond the call of duty, representing the highest ideals and integrity, and he is leaving an indelible mark on the Bettendorf community and the broader region. Congratulations on your retirement, Chief Korek, and thank you for your dedicated service. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize Breast Cancer Awareness Month. October can feel different for everyone who has been affected by breast cancer. Some people wear pink and others may be grieving, but we can all agree on the importance of community support. Breast cancer knows no age, gender, or race, but it predominantly affects women. As the single most diagnosed cancer among American women, we must remember to get screened, learn more about the risk and factors, and support families and caregivers impacted by this disease. This Breast Cancer Awareness Month, let us continue to put up a fight against breast cancer, And most importantly, let us remain united as we work to find a cure. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize the extraordinary life of Dustin Michael Cackley of Keokuk, Iowa, who passed away at age 51 after suffering a heart attack in September. Dustin's life was marked by selfless service and unwavering dedication to his country. He graduated from Keokuk Senior High School in 1991 and joined the U.S. Army later that year, beginning a 20-year career as a military police officer. His exemplary service earned him numerous accolades, including Iraq Campaign Medal, Bronze Star Medal, the Army Commendation Medal, among others. He served 2 deployments in Operation Iraqi Freedom from 2003 to 2004 and 2008 to 2009. After retiring from the military in 2011, Dustin faced personal challenges, including PTSD. Yet, with the support of his loyal military brother, Paul Schroeder, he found his way back to faith and a new purpose in life. He dedicated himself to helping veterans cope with PTSD through faith-based initiatives, co-founding the Armistice Reintegration Program in 2017. Returning to Keokuk in 2019, Dustin became an integral part of his community. He served as commander of the Keokuk American Legion Post 41, promoting Military Appreciation Night and advocating for veterans' causes. He worked tirelessly on the Veterans Memorial Commission, promoting the Agent Orange Memorial and the Road to Home. Dustin Michael Cackley's legacy is one of bravery, service, and unwavering dedication to his country and community. His impact on the lives of veterans and the city of Keokuk will be felt for generations to come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize the extraordinary efforts of Norwalk Police Officer Jared Alcorn, who saved a couple from a house fire while on patrol in August. At 3:50 a.m., Officer Alcorn smelled smoke and conducted a thorough search of the neighborhood he was patrolling, leading him to a small house where he witnessed flames engulfing the back deck. The fire, although not yet extensive, posed a grave threat to the unsuspecting couple sound asleep inside. Without hesitation, Alcorn dialed the fire department, swiftly woke and evacuated the occupants along with their pets, and called for backup. Then, displaying remarkable bravery and resourcefulness, Officer Alcorn and his partner took on the roles of impromptu firefighters. They grabbed garden hoses from both sides of the house and commenced a valiant battle against the encroaching flames. Their relentless efforts held the fire at bay until professional firefighters arrived on the scene. Thanks to the swift and selfless actions of Officer Jared Alcorn, the fire's damage contained primarily to the home's exterior. The couple and their pets were spared from harm, and the heart of the resident remained intact. Thank you, Officer Jared Alcorn. In the darkest hours of that morning, your courage shone brightly, embodying the true spirit of a dedicated and heroic public service. Mr. Speaker, I would like to address comments I recently heard on the floor, and that is a motion to vacate of Speaker McCarthy. A motion to vacate is going to continue to derail our appropriations bills process in bringing those bills to the floor. It will upset and further erode our ability to investigate the Biden family corruption, which we've made significant progress.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
And I yield back my time.
Gentlewoman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. LaMalfa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Saturday we cobbled together a 45-day continuing resolution. Now, that's not my preferred way of doing business around here. Indeed, what I talk to my constituents at home about are the process that the House Republicans, with our majority, have attempted to put in place and are putting into place, a successful Appropriations Committee process. Now, this isn't just jargon and it's inside baseball for a lot of people, but when people understand what it is they're trying to accomplish, the Appropriations Committee is going to be the transparency, the light of day, the sunshine on the spending process that DC has, and we need much more of. So we didn't get there this year quite. We got 70% of our spending, I hate to use that term, but that's the jargon here, accomplished in 4 bills already. We still need to do 8 bills as our budget is divided up in about 12 pieces in the appropriations process. So we have a little ways to grind out here. So what happened? We weren't able to come to agreement, even amongst all Republicans, on getting all these bills done. We had a good flurry at the end, and getting a few done here in the last couple of weeks. But we have much more to do. We want to get through the whole process because we want the transparency so the public can see what it is we're doing in this process. The Appropriations Committee in the light of day, line by line, etc., so that we can then send documents over to the Senate and have them contemplate, and they're not going to like exactly what we do, but we'll bring it back and hopefully achieve a consensus we can all live with in this era. And I have to remind you, what we've laid out as our goals in the House Republicans aren't necessarily shared by the Senate or the White House. It's a hostile environment to try and cut back to pre-COVID levels of spending, as well as secure our border from a Senate Democrat majority and the Biden White House. These are our goals. We want to have a secure border. We had a document early last week that we thought was going to take a giant leap there, but we couldn't get all the votes we needed, even our own conference, to get it done. Pretty frustrating. So we have this 45-day ability to buy time and what we passed the other day. I'm not happy with continuing resolutions, especially long-term ones. This is fairly short-term. It'll enable us to do our work and get these appropriations done. That's what we're doing. Yes, it continues spending pretty much as it was, but we were up against the deadline. Now, what are the bad things? You know, government shutdown is what we're up against. Yeah, it's a terrible way of doing business. I've been around a couple of them, and colleagues have been here longer than me. One of my friends said has been through 5 of them. Nobody ever wins politically or policy-wise on a shutdown. What happens? Our troops stop getting paid, okay? Our loyal soldiers out there on the line stop getting paid, and they're already underwaged, so to speak. Contracts that we would have with defense come to a grinding halt. Now, and other federal projects on construction, road, infrastructure, what have you, come to a grinding halt. Now, what happens on that? When you demobilize construction crews or assembly lines like that, they don't just turn right back on and off like a light switch. People go home, they move their equipment to other things. And so it's much more expensive to turn back on something that was already in momentum. Try shutting off a nuclear power plant. Not the same what we're talking about here, but you don't just turn these things on and off. And that's what happens. Permitting, when folks have been waiting so long for EPA or Army Corps of Engineers or somebody to get their freaking job done on getting permits out, and then they have an excuse to shut down, oh, this week-long shutdown, 2-week-long, it's going to set us back 3 months. We've heard that sort of thing around here. So even though it might feel good, yeah, let's shut the mother down, you know, because a lot of people don't like what government does, including me. In my real life as a farmer in Northern California, I see a lot of dumb stuff government does. But shutting things down in the middle of the stream here doesn't really work for anybody, unfortunately. Federal employees will still get paid, even if they're not at work, so it's a paid vacation. They'll get their back pay. Congress will still get paid by the month. Doesn't really shut anything off that way. So we don't gain a lot with the shutdown. So we held our nose. We're going to do this for 45 days to do a good process in the Appropriations Committee. I want to have faith in that. I want the American public to have faith in an open process and doing it correctly, because process is something that's been lacking a lot in Congress and in government in recent years. We have to cling to process as something that's important.
Gentleman's time has expired.
So we can have things laid out constitutionally. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes a gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate Judge Melinda Anderson on an incredible career in the 1st District Liberty County court system. Judge Anderson's first major achievement of her storied career came when she was appointed ex officio notary and justice of the peace by the Liberty County Grand Jury in 1979. Then in 1983, the legislative consolidation of the Justice of the Peace and Small Claims Court created a magistrate court. Consequently, in 1988, Judge Melinda Anderson was elected as Liberty County Chief Magistrate. Since then, she has served the 1st District of Georgia well, and her accolades are too numerous for one speech. I would like to take the time to congratulate Judge Melinda Anderson on a magnificent career, which included awards for both Magistrate of the Year and Lifetime Achievement. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor Darien City Councilman Griffin Lotson, who is featured in the International African American Museum in Charleston, South Carolina. The Butler Island Plantation, where the International African American Museum stands, was where Lotson's ancestors, the Gullah Geechee, were enslaved. Councilman Lotson's family spans 7 generations of Gullah Geechee roots. In addition to serving on Darien City Council, he also serves as a vice chair of the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor, a nonprofit dedicated to preserving and sharing Gullah heritage and culture. Griffin Lotson was also recently promoted to the level of Global and State Goodwill Ambassador. Darien, along with the rest of Georgia's 1st Congressional District, is honored that Councilman Lotson calls our community home. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate Command Sergeant Major Lindsay Streeter for winning the Military Times Veteran of the Year. Sergeant Major Streeter enlisted in the Army at 17 years old as a 76 Charlie equipment parts and records specialist. Lindsay deployed from Hunter Army Airfield in support of Operation Desert Storm, and when he returned, he was asked to go into the U.S. Army Recruiting Command, taking on the weighty task of recruiting the next generation of soldiers. Over his 31-year career, he would go on to hold leadership positions at every level, culminating with his first assignment as Commandant of the Non-Commissioned Officer Academy at Fort Stewart. Although he hung up the uniform, his desire to serve others only grew stronger. Once he left the Army, he joined Bank of America as its Senior Vice President of Global Military Affairs, a position that allows him to help transitioning service members and longtime veterans with financial education and assistance. On top of his professional work, Lindsay started a charity with his late wife, Mary Ann, Quad E, that provides health care resources to underserved and low-income families. In 2022, he also purchased the semi-pro basketball team, the Savannah Hurricanes, yet another example of serving our local community. Simply put, his impact on the 1st District of Georgia is immeasurable. Thank you, Command Sergeant Major Streeter, for your continued service to not only our country, but also to our local community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until the hour of 2 p.m. today.